Hello everyone, this is G and I'm back with a new video. I hope everybody's doing well. It's actually a little after 8:30 p.m. here in New York City. I didn't intend on doing a video today, hence why I'm in my evening gown, my sleeping gown, but I wanted to give my opinion on this because I've seen this floating around the internet a bit. Now you have this individual, David Scott Jaffe, or Jaffe, I don't know, who, let's say, is not a fan of Metroid Dread, right? And he says here that Nintendo's $60 game versus Shantae and the Seven Sirens, aka an actual great example of a modern Metroidvania, which is only 30 bucks, right? I've seen these criticisms and what I consider to be bad faith takes about this game recently, now that it's out and people are reviewing it. A lot of people like it, and here's the thing: no video game, no piece of work ever gets universal praise, right, or universal damnation, right? You never bat 1,000, and you'd never miss 1,000 either, right? You're gonna miss some, and you're gonna hit some. But here's the thing: the question is, why does Mr. Jaffe, right, Mr. Jaff, think this game is bad? And it seems to be that because he struggled with the tutorial section. There's a video of it down here from this individual, Marco Boyd, right? Showing Mr. Jaff trying to go through the tutorial section and struggling with it, whereas other streamers figured it out pretty quickly that you have to shoot the ceiling to sort of fight your way out. Now, here's the thing: it would be easy to just make another video about how you need to get good, scrub. And as a general rule, when it comes to games like this, that is a mantra that I believe in and I stand by. I have yet to come across any complaint about the difficulty of Metroid, and apparently, this is there actually is a difficulty level. There actually is a hard mode that you can unlock. I learned this recently after you beat the game. So guess what? You're not playing on the hardest setting. There's actually a harder one, right? But I've already done videos about the lack of patience people seem to have, right, with the idea of having to explore and all that and struggle through a video game. But I want to dive a little bit deeper than that. Instead of playing on easy mode, which would be to just dunk on this individual, I want to play on hard mode. I want to give a more nuanced opinion about why I think this happens. And the best way I can describe it is this: I think a few things are going on. I think, one, that there is a disconnect between what certain people are expecting of the game and what the game truly is. Metroid is not a, or at least Metroid Dread, I should say, is not a modern game per se. Right? It plays on modern systems. It has, beautiful modern day graphics. But play wise, what it's expecting of you, it's actually very old school in that way. It's an homage to the past. It's closer to Super Metroid in its design and in the way it plays than it is to anything more modern. Because you even see here in Mr. Jaff's tweet, he says that this Shantae game is a great example of a modern Metroidvania, right? Metroidvania being Metroid combination Castlevania. These type of side-scrolling, multi-platform action adventure type games, which were very popular in the 80s and 90s. Metroid is not modern. It is an ode. It is a love letter to the old school. It is a love letter to its past. And there are some people who understand that, and there are some people who don't. Now, I want to be clear. Mr. Jaff is entitled to his opinion, although I don't agree. I don't believe that the tutorial level is bad game design. I believe that he's simply impatient. I actually watched a very interesting video recently from a channel called Designing For, I believe it is, where it actually talked about the level design of the very first Super Mario Brothers level, right? So level 111 of the original Super Mario Brothers game. And how there's a certain, I guess you could say, psychology to that level and how certain items are placed in certain ways, right, to convince you to explore, right, that level, right, to jump around and to try things. And I think if you've ever played Super Mario Brothers, especially the original one, right, you remember, jumping around trying to hit all the blocks, and sometimes you would hit something and you would get that beanstalk that would take you into the sky and everything, right? Or you would try to jump down all of those, green pipes. Some of them would work, and there would be those space that like the underground space where there would be like coins and everything. Sometimes it wouldn't work at all. Sometimes you would try it and you would have like that Venus flytrap thing come up, right? But the thing is, old school games, especially of this type, action platformers, right? Sonic, Mario, Metroid, Castlevania. And I actually have played the original Castlevania game. I never beat it. Neither me or my brother ever beat it. But we did play it. We did play it. But the thing is that those games, they gave you like the bare minimum. They may give you a brief tutorial on like how the controls work, right? This button does this button does that, press right to move forward, or anything like that. But outside of that, it didn't tell you to do anything. Even games like The Legend of Zelda, right, which is a role playing game, right? It didn't tell you specifically where, and I've also played the original version of that. I'm old. But it didn't tell you where to go, right? It didn't tell you what item to next pick up, at least not overtly. You just sort of figured it out on your own. And what I find interesting is that that sort of non-linear, I guess the words would be, gameplay, where you're allowed to explore and to interact with the environment, right? You slash things, you hit things, you shoot things, you run into stuff. You try to sort of, just explore and see what happens, right? Will this result in me dying, or, will it take me to a secret level, right? That seems to have died out as gaming went on, right? You don't have to search for stuff anymore. Not only I'm not gonna say all games, but it seems to be the trend these days is that video games don't just hold your hand, they literally just drag you through, right? They just grab your arm and just drag you through the game. And I think that's where the disconnect is. I think people are expecting a modern gaming experience, but Metroid Dread is not based on that. It's not built on that. Which you would think Mr. Chaff would understand. But who knows? Who knows? But how do I put it? I remember just so many experiences playing old school video games, and that, yes, that frustration, but also that joy of exploring the environment or having puzzles and traps where the game didn't give you the answer. I struggled so much playing Metal Gear Solid. I know I often talk about the Sniper Wolf battle, but that was like one. You had stuff like just trying to get around the cameras. I remember struggling so much to just get out the first level, right? Just past those two guards, right? Or when you're trying to leave the first building, you have to go into the snowfield. You have to like crawl because there's these laser tripwires, and if you trip them, it basically causes a death trap, right? This like poison gas comes in, and it's a death trap. Especially, um, well, actually, even if you have the gas mask later on, if you trip the wire, the the door you have to go through never opens, so you're still stuck. Right, but I remember having to try to figure my way around stuff like that because the laser wires aren't obvious. You need either the thermal goggles or you need Snake's cigarette to light your way, literally, or the electric floor in one section, and you have to use the missile to de-electrify the ground and all this other stuff, or even games like what was it, Tasmania for the Genesis, I think it was. There was this one level where you're like in a mine, right? You're in a mine. You have to go up and down, up and down, and that game gave you no clues about when you had to go up and when you had to go down, when you had to speed up and slow down. I can remember as a little kid being so scared of that level. Like I could literally hear my heartbeat. That level made me so anxious. And various other games. I mean, I remember even playing beat 'em ups like Streets of Rage, right? I mean, like I figured out that like you could throw people into things like the tables or the arcade machines in certain levels by accident, right? You're just messing around and you throw an enemy and suddenly they're crashing through stuff. It's like, oh, cool. But that's the thing. Video games of yesteryear, of the generation I grew up in, didn't hold your hand. But the exchange of that was that they allowed you to explore, they allowed you to discover things on your own. Right? That was the beauty of it. That was the joy of it. Even fighting games like Mortal Kombat, I know, I've talked about MK to death, right? They didn't tell you how to do the fatalities, right? They barely told you how to find Reptile. The game would drop certain clues, like perfection is the key, death is the lock. Look to La Luna or whatever it is, right? There's like a certain there's like certain things you have to meet to like unlock the reptile fight in the first game. But that was that was just the way things were back then, right? The game may drop hints, but it left you by and large to figure it out. And sometimes it wouldn't even drop hints. You were just expected to just try stuff until it worked, whether it was special moves. Maybe you had the booklet and it would tell you how to do some of the basic special moves, right? Or whether it be fatalities and anything, right? Like you can't pause the very first Mortal Kombat game and scroll down and see, how do I do this character's fatality like you can now in Mortal Kombat 11. And I think that's sort of where the issue is. There's been a lot of issues with modern gaming, more than I could possibly recount. But I will say that what I think has happened over the 30 years now, 30, 35, 36 years, depending on where you start, that gaming has been a real force in the entertainment sphere is that the best way I can describe it is the song Eye of the Tiger, right? From the Rocky films. There's a certain part of the song where the singer says, "You trade your passion for glory," right? And I think that's what's happened by and large with the genre of gaming as a media endeavor, right? Not necessarily individual titles, but just as an industry overall. I think that's what has happened. You've always had your big name video games and your big name titles, and many franchises that exist today, like Metroid, got their start in the gaming space of the 80s and 90s. Metroid, for example, the first game came out in 1986. So the game's a year older than no, a year younger, right? Than I am, right? But I think what's happened, to sort of sum it up, is that over the years, because of the way gaming has changed and the way it's received, generally speaking, gaining popularity. This is not to say it's as institutionalized or accepted as, say, maybe movies and TV. It's still very much a new media, right? So there's still a lot of growing pains and there's still a lot of resistance from legacy media like TV, right? But There were no real video game franchises, probably outside of Super Mario Brothers. um, and maybe not even that in the mid '80s and the early 1990s, right? Everything was young, everything was new, right? You may have had like you had like Super Mario, Super Mario 2, which next to no one knew about, especially in America, and then you had Super Mario Brothers 3, right? That was like the most you got at that time when it came to a franchise at that time. But what I think is that as gaming has become more and more popular and more corporatized over the years, and not just in America or in the West in general, but also in Japan, what's happened is that the way a video game is made has changed. It used to be that a lot of video games were passion projects, right? For example, the story behind the Final Fantasy franchise and why it's called Final Fantasy. The general story, it's changed over the years, but the general story is that Square was about to go out of business, and the Final Fantasy game was like their last shot, right? It was going to be their last attempt, so they put everything they had into it, and it took off, right? And now it's turned into like a little mini. It's turned into a franchise of its own, and it's basically a playable movie and all of this other stuff, and they cannot leave Final Fantasy VII behind. They're still in the shadow of their greatest work 20 some years later. But anyway, I think what's happened over the years is that games got easier, right? Games held your hand more. We still had those interactive environments, but now they were broader, right? Right. It was GTA 3, and being able to go in the buildings and whatnot. You interacted with the um, environment in that way, right? But for example, a GTA game normally does not require that you like. It requires exploration, to be fair, but it's usually for like hidden stuff that really doesn't impact the game all that much, right? You don't usually have to run around and hit this crazy jump to get the super weapon. That's the only weapon that could ever beat the bad guy, right? That type of exploration that was common in video games back in the 80s and 90s has fallen by the wayside for video games to tell you where to go and tell you what to do, because they got easier, because more normies came into it, right? It used to be the enthusiast, right? It used to be the enthusiasts who were your main consumers, and little kids, right? Their little kids were interested in something. Ooh, Sonic, ooh, Mario, right? Whatever it is, their parents buy it for them. But your main consumers back then were the enthusiast and the kids, right? Especially in the West, arcades slowly died out as the '90s went on, and more video games not only went to console but were made for consoles or PCs. But as things do, right, you trade your passion for glory, right? The gaming industry started getting glory by receiving some form of mainstream acceptance, mainstream attention. Video game movies are made. More and more video game movies are made, and all this other stuff. And now, slowly over time, 30 years later, we're at a point where the old school video game that challenged you, that said, here's the world you get to play in, go figure it out and come back and win, is now considered uh, almost. I'm trying to think of the right word for it. Is it apocrypha? I don't know. But it's almost considered this horrendous thing, right? That makes at least some individuals sincerely angry that a game dare be somewhat difficult or not tell you exactly what you have to do. Right? I can't think of the proper term, but all I can say is that it just seems so. It's like the best way I can put it is this: me as an old school gamer, I look at modern video games and I for a good number of at least well known titles, I don't see a video game anymore. And perhaps for those like Mr. Jaffe, maybe it's the same on their end. They look at an old school game or a game like Metroid Dread, which is made with the old school in mind, and they don't see a video game. I see something that is too easy, and they see something that is too hard. Perhaps on both our ends, what we're seeing is something that is antithetical to what our idea of a video game is. Maybe that's it. Maybe we're having the same reaction on opposite sides. They look at this and they see something needlessly challenging. I look at this and I see something that is uh, probably should be more challenging. And I want to be clear. Like I said earlier, I believe in get good, scrub. I believe that if you're a person who's going to play Metroid Dread or any Metroid game really, you have to understand how a Metroid game plays, how it's designed, the type of person it's for. If you like challenge and exploration and not being told what to do and not having your hand held, Metroid is your game, right? Because it's kept that old school spirit more or less over the years. If you don't like that type of game, this is not the game for you to play. But I do think that's in part what has happened over time. If this ramble makes any sense at all, right? This idea of a challenging video game that doesn't tell you overtly or explicitly where to go or what to do or what to shoot. Perhaps it's as foreign an idea to a more modern gamer as a game telling you everything that you should do, making it painfully obvious, is to me, right? A game that tells you everything is a concept that I really can't wrap my head around. And maybe for those people on the other side, a game that doesn't tell you everything is something difficult for them to wrap their heads around. I don't know. All I know is that video games used to be like the genie level, like the Cave of Wonders level, I should say, in the old Aladdin game, where you have to ride the carpet, you have to go up and down, up and down. And sometimes you would have genies, I guess you could say finger. It wasn't really his hand, but his finger sometimes tell you to go up, sometimes it would tell you to go down, and then it would just give you a question mark and you had to guess. Right? That's the sort of game I grew up with, and even 30 years later, that's sort of like my archetypical definition of a video game. And perhaps for someone who came up in a more modern gaming space where games are much more popular and they're these multi-million dollar AAA endeavors and they're made for more casual players or again people who are just not enthusiasts like myself, maybe what they're accustomed to is a is just different. Just different, right? But in short, not all video games are made for everyone, and that's okay. I do not believe, and I want to be clear, I stand by previous stances that I've taken. Get good. I don't believe that every single solitary game needs an easy mode. Plenty of them have it, and that's fine. If the if the developers and the designers think it should have an easy mode, that's okay. But I'm not gonna demand, nor do I agree with demanding a video game. Every video game have an easy mode, and I certainly do not agree with things like cheats and whatnot. Uh, uh, Being easily and readily available. I do believe that things like cheats or special items should be things you unlock Not that you pay for. They shouldn't be behind a paywall. It shouldn't be loot boxes. I can't stand the paywall stuff. I can't stand the loot box stuff. I can't stand the idea of having to pay money for DLC for characters who've always been part of a certain game franchise or for costumes. I remember when Street Fighter V was out, and they had the character pack for I think it featured Sagat and Sakura, and I'm like, you really want me to put down $30 to play as two mainstay characters from the franchise? I don't think so. A new character, perhaps, maybe one that hasn't been featured too often is coming back. I can understand that, but for the guy who was literally in the very first Street Fighter game, and the teenage girl who's been in the game since the Alpha series in '95, I do not think so. But that's just me. That's just me. Right? So I am a firm believer that certain elements from the past should be maintained. Right? But at the same time, perhaps I'm starting to realize now that we just have a bunch of people, a generation perhaps, who grew up with a very different idea of what a video game is and what a video game does and what it requires. And perhaps, just like I have a hard time understanding their idea of a video game, maybe they have a hard time understanding my idea of a video game. I don't know. Maybe we're just having translation issues. Maybe it's just lost in translation. Maybe it's a generation gap. Gaming, like me, is getting older. And like anything, right? The younger generation struggles to understand the older generation and vice versa. That being said, I do think that Metroid Dread, from what I have heard, is an awesome game. And hopefully, one of these days, I'll actually get around to uh, buying a Switch or whatever it is and getting the game at some point. If life ever, lets up and gives me a breather, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, at some point in my life, I'll play the game. It may not be right now, but hopefully, at some point, I will get around to it. But I look at it like this: let the people who enjoy Metroid for what it is enjoy it. And Mr. Jaffe, just because you struggle at a level does not mean the level was poorly designed. It means that either are you either need to develop patience or you need to play a different video game. Not all video games are made for all people. For example, I don't like horror, so I don't play horror games. I'm not a big fan of platformers, so I don't play them anymore. It would be like demanding puzzles be taken out of a Tomb Raider game because I don't like puzzles. Some things are simply ingrained into a certain game or franchise and are integral to it. In the case of Metroid, it's the fact that it's very old school and it doesn't tell you what to do and it doesn't tell you where to go and it allows you to figure it out for yourself. So, if you're into that, have fun. If you're not, watch a playthrough. I'm not sure if I've made any sense at all with this video, but that was what was on my mind. So, I hope everybody's well, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day or night wherever you are.